what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
This episode of the Caregiver Community is sponsored by Pace at Home. During this uncertain time, Pace at Home is enrolling participants who wish to continue to remain at home. Partnering with families, Pace at Home provides caring medical support for all of our program's participants. Visit us on our website or give us a call at 828-468-3980 to talk with a representative that can discuss with you the Pace at Home all-inclusive medical approach. Pace at Home is the champion for seniors wishing to remain in their community.
Welcome to the Caregiver Community. This is a place where we talk about the joys and the challenges of caring for our aging parents and older adult loved ones also, as well as caring for ourselves. I am Frances Hall, founder and executive director of ACAP, Adult Children of Aging Parents. In this podcast, we are talking about men as caregivers. Although we typically think of caregivers as being women, 40% of those caring for an older adult loved one are men. Three of my absolute favorite people are joining me for this conversation. Bob Kane is the Vice President of Marketing for Piedmont Home Care in Winston-Salem, which is Winston-Salem, North Carolina's oldest nurse aid agency. Before his father died about a year ago, Bob was a caregiver for both of his parents. He is a former assisted living administrator, and he helped establish ACAP Winston-Salem, where he just recently rotated off as their chapter co-coordinator. In addition, Bob is a board member for ACAP Community. Bob also is the founding president of a Senior Services Industry Association, healthcare industry professionals serving seniors in Winston-Salem. He brings lots of insight to this conversation. And Bob, I am delighted you are with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances. Happy to be here.
Thanks. Mark Hensley is Associate State Director for Community Outreach and Advocacy for AARP North Carolina. He is the immediate past chair of the ACAP Community Board of Directors and now leads the Triad Retirement Leadership Association, a professional organization in North Carolina. He was an only child and sole caregiver for both of his parents who had dementia, so he has firsthand personal understanding of caregiving, as well as a wealth of professional knowledge in that he has spent most of his career envisioning and creating strategies for supporting older adults and their caregivers. Mark, always good to have you. After a 33-year career as a successful manager and leader in major retail companies, Bruce McReynolds now owns 2 Griswold home care franchises in North Carolina, dedicating himself to enhancing the lives of older adults and their caregivers. He is an active volunteer and was the impetus for beginning ACAP Guilford County, where he still serves as chapter co-coordinator. Until recently, Bruce also led TRALA, the Triad Retirement Living Association, in Guilford County, North Carolina. Bruce knows caregiving professionally, but also personally, in that he is in the midst of being the point person right now for both his mother and father, who moved from Indiana to North Carolina to be near him as they age. Bruce, it's always great to have you also with us. Thanks. Okay. Bob, Mark, and Bruce, thank you for being part of this conversation. It's a really important topic to talk about men as caregivers, and you all know it from the inside out, both personally as well as professionally. All of you have been or are a caregiver for a parent, or maybe even for a spouse. What was or is that like for you? And I'm just going to kind of open it up. Whoever wants to jump in.
Well, Bruce, Frances, I want to jump in first because my caregiving journey was a bit different. My parents were much older when they had me. So my dad was 50 when I was born. So he was 85 when I was 35. And that's when he had full-blown Alzheimer's disease, was in institutional care. And after he passed, my mother declined. And so I was a caregiver in my late 30s and in early 40s, mostly for my mother, who I moved from Western North Carolina to Raleigh, which made her very unhappy. And it was a daily new job for me. I was working full time, I was a full time parent. And now I had another full time job, which was caring for my mother who was declining with vascular dementia. And my journey was when I was much younger than most people. Usually you're in your 50s, maybe even your 60s. But, I was in the highlight of my career, and it, it was not easy.
And Mark, you just said basically that you were part of the sandwich generation. I think that's another thing that we again typically think of as women as being the caregivers both for children as well as parents. But you were in the situation of doing both at the same time.
That's correct.
Bruce, Bob, what about you all?
Yeah. Well, I'll chime in. Being a caregiver for my parents has been and continues to be a really deeply rewarding experience. It's an opportunity to serve in a way that really feels profoundly meaningful. My parents are now both in their 85 this year, and recently moved from their farm in Indiana to live closer to our family here in Greensboro. Literally just around the corner from us. But my father's since that relocation here has really been facing some significant health challenges, both physically and cognitively, resulting in multiple hospital stays. Meanwhile, my mother is still navigating the psychological difficulties that come with aging herself, but also dealing with my father's health issues. Having spent 12 years in the home care industry, I really gained a unique perspective on the complexities of family caregiving. And so I approach my role as their son with a focus really on being a navigator, helping them kind of understand the complexities of this aging process and health issues and so forth, but also a facilitator, helping them, not only understand resources that are available, but helping facilitate getting them, signed up with a primary care physician and signed up with all the other things that go along with, having a household here. So when my parents were living 500 miles away, our relationship was more about checking in with phone calls or a couple visits a year. But now that they're nearby, and their needs having increased, my involvement has really become more hands-on and practical. And so that's been a journey for me as well, changing that role as a son or a caregiver to more hands-on and practical ways. But probably more profoundly, their proximity and their increased needs has really deepened our emotional connection. It's been a strengthening of our bond, and as we face these issues together. So it's been a good journey so far, but we're still early on in my caregiving journey with my parents.
But what a lovely way of envisioning that and understanding that it really is an opportunity to get closer to your parents, and in a way that no other dynamic or no other activity would do. You're mentioning that it's different now than it was when they were 500 miles away. It's so similar to my situation when my mother moved to North Carolina. It was like, holy cow, this is a whole different ballgame. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Bob, how about you?
Well, I appreciate Bruce kind of delineating, and I think it'll come back into the conversation, some of the questions coming up, the distinction between facilitator, navigator, the behind the scenes, figuring things out, and direct hands-on caregiving. And I think that's one of the issues that comes up more for men. I'll save that for the upcoming questions, but I like that distinction. The hands-on care versus navigating, facilitating. My help with parents was mostly navigation from distance, helping my mom kind of field questions for her, insights that I have from working in the industry as she took care of my dad, who was post stroke for 20 years. And but my mom's an Army wife, career Army wife, and she has, with all the experience I have in the industry is a little bit humbling. I'd call and go, "Can I do something for you? Have you thought about such and such?" And she'd say, "Yes, I've thought about A, B, and C, and I also went ahead and got D, E, and F done, settled." I mean, she has been the model of how to age well, how to care for a spouse, everything in order. And then that's that Army wife training. You have to pick up a whole family with 3 young kids and move them across the country and keep life going. So she's really well versed in that. And it's been interesting to be able to. I serve the community a lot, and people go, "Oh my goodness, you've been so much help and all this information." And I turn to my own family, and it's like, "Nope, got it done. We're good." But I have had grew up in the kind of the caregiver world, something that kind of influenced me being a caregiver and being comfortable in that role. My twin sister had a physical birth defect that left her on the scale of mental retardation between severe and profound, and she grew up with us, and which was not the case. I'm 62. Back in the day, most folks were institutionalized immediately, so it was kind of unusual to have a sister with that level of care need living with us. But I think it tempered me in my approach to looking at care and caring for people. And then blessed to have 2 children. My daughter, our youngest, has Down syndrome. So again, back into that kind of caregiver realm, some crossover differences between adult and disability services, but kind of the same feel, obviously. And I think the most direct caregiver experience I've had as being the kind of the hands-on caregiver and primary caregiver was for 2 neighbors. A 93-year-old for 4 years before she passed, and just recently a neighbor that we cared for almost a year before he passed. So going through the hospital cycles and nursing homes and home care and all of that. And yeah, a whole lot of true hands-on caregiving. And it is, you can talk about it, teach about it. When you do it, you see a different experience.
Goodness, all 3 of you. I'm like, geez, could I be your parent? You're all so involved and so gracious. How did you decide to move into that? Did you grow up, like so many of us as women grow up knowing that we will be the caregiver? Is that how it was for you all as men?
Well, I'm going to pick up on what Bob said. I'm 55, so I've been in the aging field my whole career, about 30 years. You can talk about caregiving, you can teach about it, you can read about it, but until you walk in those shoes, you don't truly understand what the journey is. For me, I grew up in a unique family. As I said, I was born late to appearance. My mother took care of her father until his passing at home at age 99. So Grandpa lived with us. He was one of the last surviving World War I veterans. So I have stories that most people my age haven't heard. My parents were, of course, lived and born during the Depression. My mother cared for her sister until her passing. And then I was an only child. So your question is, how did I make the decision to become a caregiver? I didn't have a choice, but I knew that it would happen because that was just a pattern of our family. So I did grow up thinking that I would need to be prepared for this, but I got into the field of aging kind of by accident. And then I was like, oh, when I have to do this, it won't be a problem. I know everything. Yeah, it was not. Navigating the Medicaid system, navigating Medicare, navigating supports in the community as the recipient of those services is much different than writing policy for it or providing budgets for it, which is what I did in the field of aging at the state level. And also finding out that my employer was not very supportive of me being gone for inevitable doctor's appointments, transferring my mother eventually to Raleigh, her being eventually in long-term care, and actually being pulled aside by my employer and saying, you've been out a lot, and um, these were not choices. And that was really the day I woke up and went, wait, employers are not supporting caregivers. And I work in the field. I'm a government employee working in the field of aging, and my own employer is not supporting me taking leave, taking sick leave or annual leave to go care for my mother. So it was really eye opening. And what it did was fuel my passion to make things better. I was the co-author of writing our first Alzheimer's state plan in 2016, and a lot of my passion poured into that because I'd walked in those shoes.
Yes. In terms of the employer, that is so universal and clearly not gender specific. Yeah. What about Bob, Bruce? What about you all?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I think the answer to this question of at what point did you become a caregiver is different for every single person, right? Some folks, as we're learning, are kind of thrust into that role due to an event or an immediate circumstance. For me, there really wasn't a decision point, of becoming a caregiver. I don't really view caregiver, if you want to put some air quotes around that, as a label or a title. But caring for my parents is really, a natural evolution driven by love and concern for them. So, I continually think, of their caregiving for me growing up. And so for me, this is the payback, right? It's me returning the love or the concern and giving them what they gave me, as a younger child. So, I see it as a responsibility, yes, but also a privilege to give back some of that love and care that my parents showed for me.
What a beautiful way of saying that, Bruce. Absolutely. Bob?
I think it was kind of a mix. I'm not surprised that I became a caregiver just because of the background I shared earlier, but I don't know that it was a decision so much. And given the topic, men as caregivers, first of all, I was astonished, like Mark, working in the industry. I'd never seen that statistic before, that 40% of caregivers are males. I'm astonished it's that high. So salute, hats off to all the guys out there silently doing the work. But yeah, I want to cringe a little bit at the word decision, because I think, one of the messages that ought to come out of this podcast is, it is what Bruce alluded to. It's about caring, it's about respecting, and it doesn't have to be like a formal decision. And I think a lot of caregivers are initially overwhelmed with the duties of caregiving and all the responsibilities and all the things to know and keep up with. And, there's a book from in our industry, been out for decades, called The 36-Hour Day. Gosh, what a great title, because, I tell people, you get in the shower and, shave and shower and get dressed in, 20, 30 minutes, you're in and out. Try doing that and for a lot of parents, you can say, try doing that remember when you did that with your infant, just you gave up going out to dinner just because it was so much of an event to get the child ready and all that extra time. So make that child 135 pounds and, somebody with dementia and maybe fighting you and not understanding why. And so that's why we see so much separation of caregivers from our community. They just kind of roll up the sleeves and they forget everything else or put it aside. But particularly for men, I want men to know who are thinking maybe they couldn't be a caregiver and wondering. No, you can be. Everybody is scared. 3 guys here in the industry just said, when it happened, it was like, oh, well, gosh, I'm going to screw it up. I think women are a little more culturally forgiving, and our culture is a little more forgiving of women. You can have a second chance. Men, that competitive. If you don't win, you're a failure right off the bat. Number 2 is a complete loser. And it's like, we got to get rid of that thinking. That's that stupid small town football field mentality. We see it in communities. Our community is better than your community. No, we're all just community. But I think men are dissuaded because, honestly, of that core fear that I'm not going to do it right. Guess what? You're not going to do it right. None of us have done it perfectly. We'll admit to that.
But neither does anybody else.
Exactly.
That's the thing. It's universal.
I ran an assisted living, and guess what? Guess who forgot and ended up going out to buy new clothes for his neighbor, the last neighbor I cared for, because I forgot to do the basic thing of putting his name in his underwear and clothes, and it got lost in the laundry flow. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I taught people that, right? Okay, now that I'm confessing, I did it twice. He went through 2 different nursing homes, and I did it twice, and I had to go out and buy clothes again for him twice because he had nothing to wear. And so, yeah, you're going to make mistakes, even on the small things, and all the professionals get it wrong too. I had a geriatrician, fellowship trained 20-year veteran geriatrician who called me years ago on a Saturday and said, I just need a review. And I said, oh, it's for your family. And they said, yes. And I said, oh, so you're an idiot. And they said, yes. My family, I'm a physician, and my family thinks I don't know what I'm talking about. But she said, I realize that I know the stuff, I can teach it, but it takes that community to remind and cover all the steps.
And it is exactly what you all are saying. It is so very different when we are actually doing it.
Yes.
And we are doing for someone we love and we care about. And so many caregivers don't see themselves as being caregivers. That term is sort of off-putting. And so I use it judiciously. But the fact is, if you are doing any number of things, you have stepped into that realm of being a caregiver, even if, Bruce, as you said, it is an evolution. You care about this person, you love this person, and you want for them to have the best life. And so you do whatever you can. You all have talked, I think each of you has mentioned this concept of navigator or facilitator. That kind of speaks to the kind of activities. So let's talk about the kind of activities that, very honestly, that men typically do or are comfortable doing that really do bring important stuff to the table. So who wants to take that? What kind of activities do you do?
Yeah, I'll start it off just by saying that, one of my really key learnings or lessons from my parents in this journey kind of hit me kind of hard. I mentioned that I just live around the corner from my parents, and so I had popped in, and Mom said, Dad has been asking, is Bruce coming by today? And that really helped me drive home the topic that companionship and interaction and a sense of family is probably the most important thing that we as a caregiver, and particularly a male caregiver, can offer to our parents. I think we, by having this male persona, we probably aren't maybe as good as the soft skills as maybe our female counterparts. And so I think we need to, as a human being and a male caregiver in this point, we have the ability to show compassion and interaction and companionship to our parents. And you know what? Someone in their 80s and 90s, that's what they value most, right? They want to know that they still have their family around them, that they are getting some of the rewards back from having spent, 60 years raising someone. And now their payback is really the human interaction. So, I think probably more than any of the other hands-on activities, recognizing that we as a male family member, a male caregiver, we do have the opportunity and the almost obligation to bring that sense of family and kind of those warmer, softer emotions back to our parents' lives.
What a beautiful way, Bruce, what a beautiful way of just saying, be present, show up, come, visit, be in contact. Thank you.
So I want to throw something in about this that's a little different. Um, the difference between men and women. First of all, I think mothers and daughters share a different relationship about bathing and personal care. And often females are not real comfortable doing that for dad, but they get over it. I think in my opinion, it's much harder for a male son to do those personal care items for their mother. And I've said for years, I think there should be a law that if you or your parent are not comfortable uh, seeing the other without any clothes on, then there should be somebody to come in and relieve them from that, because it's also the demographic of women live longer than men. So typically, the females are caring for the females. But then in my case and Bruce and Bob's case, we were sons caring for a mother. And it does come to that point that personal care comes into that, whether it be toileting, whether it be bathing. Um, they're so vulnerable. I found my mother kind of upside down in the floor, you know, not clothed, covered in all kinds of bad things because she'd had a stroke in the middle of the night, tried to get up. That was the hardest day of my entire life because she was so vulnerable. I didn't know what to do. I've always said I have talked about caregiving my whole career, and I'm one of the worst caregivers because I hate bad smells. I don't like to wait on people. I'm kind of grouchy, but I did it, and I did it with patience, and I learned more patience because she didn't like it any more than I did. But we got through it together. And one of the things that I realized was to not just focus on those things that had to be done, but focus on things to bring joy, like bring her Kentucky Fried Chicken and let's roll out into the courtyard and have a pretend picnic. You know, I could have just said, eat what they brought you on your tray, whether it's at the hospital or wherever, but mix it up, do something that makes her happy, and I call those pleasant events that got through the difficult
How lovely.
times.
How lovely to be so mindful of what your mom really liked. She evidently liked Kentucky Fried Chicken. So let's have some. I love that. I love
She
that.
did.
I'll say I really appreciate Bruce's perspective of what we used to call when I worked in children's services of just being overdoing, being present, and not feeling like you have to do. And I think that is, again, culturally one of the things that's put upon men or we put upon ourselves, that we feel like we always have to be doing. And so, yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that piece up, Bruce. As far as the skill set, yeah, there's a whole range of things that need to be done. At a recent ACAP talk in Winston, Brent Stevens, one of our attorneys, talked about, and he was talking about the legal financial piece, but he's gave the example of, our son does his own taxes, and so he should do mom and dad's taxes. It's like, yeah, but your son has his own personal taxes, and mom and dad have an estate, with two holdings and properties, and he could really screw it up. Maybe he could do it all right, but it's likely he could screw it up because it's a different tier, right? So his advice was, and I think it's very good advice in this realm, and especially for men, is have the humility to know when you're above your head in any task, then have the humility to reach out and to someone who does know how to do it. If there's a practical kind of takeaway going into this, as I mentioned, I think men feel more trapped by, wow, I'm going to be such a failure at this, I won't even try. But I think if you shift your plan to, what are the functions I'll have to do? What am I really good at? When will I need? And what will be my threshold marker to tell me that now is when I need to raise my hand and reach out to somebody else, be it paid or unpaid, somebody who can do this task. Which is what we always preach, build a team. Don't try to do everything yourself anyway.
Bruce?
Yeah, I just want to touch on kind of, Mark indicated, kind of this emotion that goes on kind of in providing hands-on care, especially when it's very personal or intimate types of care activities. And I really experienced that, recently with my father. I grew up in a family that we didn't do a lot of touching and hugging and those warmer types of emotions. And so for the very first time, here I am feeding my father, helping him recognize family members, helping bathe him and toilet him and change briefs. And so this experience of, providing this very intimate level of care really broke down a lot of barriers because, I was able to see my father in a vulnerable, sensitive, soft manner. And that was new. So, I think, from a male perspective, while that may seem like a big step, if we're thrust into the situation of having to provide personal care, there's also some real benefits that we could realize emotionally in terms of perhaps forming a higher level of connection with the individual as we're kind of stepping over some of those pre-existing barriers that might have been in place, growing up.
But all of that is so important. So important. And my takeaway from what you all have just said is that as our parent or our older loved one finds themselves in such a place of vulnerability, the fact is we also become extremely vulnerable. And if we have the courage and the strength, because it is courageous, it does take strength to be willing to do whatever is needed and to be present for our loved one however they need it, to kind of get over ourselves, to get over the limitations and the barriers that we may think. And I think your analogy, whoever said it about the football field, the typical male stereotype of you got to do it this way and you've got to always be right and you've always got to be strong and dominant and all that kind of stuff. It's like, it's a whole different ballgame. And that you as men have so much to offer because you as yourself, who happens to be male, that you bring so much to that relationship that is needed, particularly as we get older. Yeah.
Francis, that was me that brought up that analogy because I am not a sports guy, and I was the practice dummy for my football team. They kind of held me up and let the big guy hit me. But but I want to challenge again men who are still kind of stuck in that perspective that it's all about competition and coming out on top and all that hoo-ha sports stuff. Okay, think about your coaches. And I guarantee you that the ones that come to mind as most inspirational were those coaches who really didn't fit that mold of aggressive competition, but the ones who cared about their players, did things off the football field to show some some support of their players and their families. Those are the inspirational coaches. Those are the ones that movies are made about. And so if there's a nudge that you need as a male to say, I don't know what are other guys going to think about this? Think about that coach and who is so inspiring to you to take a lead in caring, and let that be an inspiration.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. My next question may pull at some heartstrings for you, but the question is, and some of you have already talked about this. I guess really all of you have already talked about this. But what has been the most meaningful part of being a caregiver? And were there things that you said, no, drawing the line, can't do it?
I'll jump back into that one. So yeah, I'm much more comfortable. Like Mark said, I can be grumpy and demanding too. So let's get this done. And so more comfortable in the navigator role. But one of the brightest moments in my life, and Francis, I think I told this story on a previous podcast, ACAP podcast. So I've mentioned my mom, who was the Army wife, everything taken care of, and we were in the hospital a couple of months before. My dad was in the hospital a couple of months before he passed. And there was a chance to get an air flight to get further care in a helicopter. And everybody, verbally, out loud, doctors, everybody involved was like, yes, this is the thing. Once the seat on the helicopter comes open, we take it. So I called my mom. The seat came open. I happened to be on duty with my dad. And I called her at home and I said, hey, we got the seat. So just wanted to in the loop. And she starts hesitating, and I'm thought, this is not a hesitant woman. And she said, I didn't want to tell your dad that I'm afraid he will die when he gets in the helicopter, just because of the pressure transitions. He's had heart issues and strokes, and she didn't think he'd get off the helicopter if he got on, and she'd never voiced that before. And so I asked her, and she said, no, she had not voiced that, and she was holding off. And I said, this is really important. I said, can you tell Dad this? Because they had a great relationship. She's burst into tears and said, I can't tell him. And so I took a breath and I said, can I tell him for you? And this very strong woman, very independent, in charge woman, just burst into tears and said, you do that? I'm like, of course. And so it was this beautiful moment to come in and do something very important for her. And once he knew, she was afraid he would be upset about it. He was not. Once he knew, as soon as his wife, my mom, said, no, I'm afraid of this, he said, no, we just won't do it. Let the next person have the seat on the helicopter. So to me, that was a profound moment of vulnerability, to be able to step in and help do that thing that my mom couldn't, knowing that it may hasten my father's death, and because he was turning down access to additional care.
All kinds of things wrapped up in that moment.
Yeah.
All kinds of things. Yeah. Yeah.
Francis, in terms of the most meaningful part of caregiving, I think, I mentioned kind of breaking down some barriers and that being facilitated through becoming helping out on a much more personal level. But I think, what I'm learning just in my journey is that, there's emerging barriers to get over. So, as an example, resistance to care, or this strong desire for independence, probably more so than we've ever seen in a parent's life, right? They're hanging on to what's left. And so, I've learned that lesson even recently in my caregiving activities, to realize that our parents have lived 80 some years making good decisions, right? And probably some bad ones too, but learning from those. But they have their own desires and goals, even at this segment of their life, still having things that they want to stand for or believe in and achieve. And so, really our our role is really to support and to guide, almost as much as it is to provide physical assistance. It's to help understand kind of what their goal is at this point, and help them work toward that.
Boy, that would be a huge conversation and such an important conversation. What do you want? You know, don't let me decide for you. If you have the capacity to decide for yourself, let me listen to what you are saying. Let me ask the question or questions, and let me listen so that I can make sure that I am doing what you want. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Mark, any thoughts?
Um, my mother was maintaining a home, paying her bills. The day that I realized something cognitively was wrong was that her checkbook was a mess. She could not do numbers. And then we went and had the test where she drew a clock, and I just was horrified at what I was seeing. And I didn't realize that her cognition was so bad. But down the road, she would say to me, questions about her house. She had questions about bills being paid. And, I kept saying, I'm handling all that. It's all taken care of. And then the best part of that was the day she just let all that go. And I could tell it was a huge relief for her. She knew something was wrong, and she knew that she couldn't maintain a home. She couldn't maintain a checkbook. All of that was just too overwhelming. And when all that was off of her, and eventually when she was in long-term care, my mother actually liked being in the security of a facility, having people kind of wait on her. She kind of liked it, and because she had dementia, she could be kind of a difficult woman before her cognitive impairment. And when she was fully into vascular dementia, she became this very docile, sweet lady, and she was not unhappy in long-term care. So for me, even though it was a difficult journey to get there, her last years were content. Um, she felt secure. I think she felt very alone in her house. And even though she really didn't act like she wanted to leave her home, she knew it was the best thing for her because she could not live alone any longer. So I gave myself a pat on the back that, we talk about children. For children, well, you do what's best for them even though they don't like it. When you're parenting your parents, you're in the same role again, where you have to make decisions that are better for them. It wouldn't be what they necessarily would want, even though deep down they know it's probably the right thing. Um, you have to make those decisions. And at some point, you got to stop and give yourself a pat on the back that you did the right thing for the
That sort of
betterment
that
of your
listen
loved
to what
one.
they're saying and listen to what they are not saying. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
Correct.
kind of on the
Absolutely.
flip side, what is the toughest part of being a caregiver? What do you wish you had known?
I, Go ahead, Bob. I would say probably one of the chief challenges of probably most caregivers, but perhaps particularly male caregivers, is the issue of time, right? The majority of caregivers still are working. They still may be caring for their own family, or other responsibilities. And so, I would say recognizing that time is probably the most precious commodity here, and being able to give time to yourself as a caregiver, to recharge, but also find ways to manage time to accomplish some of the caregiving responsibilities. I think looking at the families that we have helped as a home care agency in the past, or even now, I think some of the other common challenges that I see would be, a caregiver not having or knowing of the resources to care for a parent. And particularly in our local area here, we have a rich supply of services and resources available to help caregivers. And so, I think the opportunity is to key into folks that can help connect with those resources. The other thing that I think probably is prevalent amongst the majority of caregivers is not having a support system, right? Feeling like the weight of the world is on their shoulders and they're going through this journey alone. So, definitely, I think recognizing that it's a long journey. What is it? The average caregiving is 5+ years, and so building your toolkit of support so that you can go the long run and not live on a day-to-day type system. And then finally, I would say,
Do you think that that's harder for men to find that support group or that support for being a caregiver?
I think it might be harder for us to ask for help.
Yeah.
And so seeking out resources is a form of asking for help, right? Feeling like, I can manage this on my own, and, is probably prevalent among male caregivers. So you got to recognize the need for help and then seek the resources. And then finally, I'll just say, probably another challenge is just family dynamics. And we all have them, right? So, it's recognizing that dynamics exist, accepting that we all have them. And, what I love to see in families that we work with is where roles are assigned. And so, maybe as a male caregiver, I don't have a lot of time. I don't have a lot of ability to provide hands-on assistance, but you know what? I can help provide some financial support, or I can, use the internet to find local resources. And maybe another family member, has, more accessibility, or maybe they live closer, and so they're more apt to be able to help get to doctor's appointments and so forth. So, where everyone has a role, however small or great, it does help manage that family dynamic situation, so that the adult sister feels like she's being supported, and the brother has is doing something to help.
And possibly even if the adult sister has not suggested that, could the brother even say, "Hey, sis, I really want to be part of this. How can I? How can I help?"
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, Bruce.
It's one of the things I was going to comment on, that building that team. You remember the game of Not It when you were a child in school? The unpleasant task comes up, and the last one to touch their nose and say "Not it" had the task. And sadly, it seems like family caregiving becomes a game of not it, right? So whether it's male or female that ends up being the primary caregiver, insult to injury, now you've realized, okay, I'm the one with the responsibility and all the duties. I'm the primary caregiver. Now the insult to injury is then you have to kind of turn around, unless you're going to try to do it yourself, which is doomed for failure. You have to then take the responsibility to go back to all those other family members and go, okay, here's what you're going to do. You didn't take the lead, but I'm now assigning you this function. I'm going to assign you this function, right? And it's like, the ideal at least would be, the ideal would be everybody fights over who's going to take care of mom, but we rarely see that. But the second ideal would be, the second sibling saying, okay, I will help, and stepping up. So I think that's an important discussion to have out loud. Like Bruce is saying, just it's dynamics, family dynamics, call it what it is. Hey, let's have a ceasefire on all our childhood rivalries. To say that out loud in a group of siblings, do we all raise our hands, all agree that we're going to have a ceasefire on the stupidity of third grade and second grade and junior high? Okay. All right. So here's how do we move forward? Talk about that. I met a daughter who lived in Hickory, primary caregiver with siblings, and would drive dad to Wake Forest because she said it was just so much better, fuller care available to him. But she had the prescience to sit with her family and say, I want you to agree out loud now. The fact that sometime in the future, when I drive past 3 county hospitals with lesser care to get farther distance to Wake Forest Baptist Hospital with fuller care, that if Dad dies along the way of me taking him there, you will not fault me afterwards. And I thought, wow, how
Wow.
brilliant to kind of predict the future of, well, why did you drive past 3 hospitals? You killed Daddy. And she made him admit to it as a strategy that her strategy was better and they would not hold her at fault. I thought, genius.
That's brilliant. Yes, that is
Write
brilliant.
that one down.
Francis, you said your question was, what do you wish you'd known? I wish I had known that somebody had not called my mother and scammed her
Yes.
and convinced her to drop her Medicare Part
Yes.
B. Such a tiny thing that I didn't find out until we had been through a big hospitalization, and now had gone to rehabilitation, and they said to me, we got a problem. Your mother doesn't have Medicare Part B. It took me 2 years of time after my mother passed to pay that bill off because it took a couple of months to get her back on Medicare Part B because our systems are difficult and flawed. And that bill for prescription medication racked up. And literally for 2 years, I paid that bill out of my own pocket because my mother didn't have any money. She was poor. We had spent down. Um, I wish I'd known that one little decision from her being scammed um, left me with a painful thing. Every month was making a payment to pay that down so that I was not sent to court and affected my credit, because at the end of the day, when you need the help of a facility and you're the sole caregiver, you got to sign and say, if something's not covered, I'll pay for it. I wish I'd known, but it was just way down too deep in the details and found out too late. And then to find out how flawed our systems are, that it took so long to get her Part B back on. You literally have to wait until a cycle of a month, and then you have to do it on a certain day of the month. And you know, it it was painful, but you learn from it. You just wish you could pass that along to everybody else so they don't fall into the same pattern. But every situation is so different. It's just like family dynamics. I didn't have the family dynamics. I was an only child. I got to make all the decisions, but I also didn't have I had to turn to friends for help,
Right, right. There are.
and that
My
was
mother
not
was an
easy.
only child, and when she was caring for her mother, it was both a blessing and a curse because she got to make all the decisions without anyone questioning. The flip side of that is
Yep,
that, oh, there is nobody to share it with, uh, no one in the family typically
right,
to share it with. Yeah. Let me end with
right.
kind of a broad question, and that is, um, we just talked about one insight, one tip, but are there some other insights or tips that you would want to pass along specifically for men who are caregivers, and kind of wrapped up into that, possibly some of your tips would have to do with how can people support caregivers? How can friends, how can family, how can workplace? I mean, we've talked about some of that, but are there some other pieces of that that you're like, ooh, 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 so, we need to be sure to say X.
I would be not a good employee. I'm sorry, Bruce. I would not be a good employee of AARP if I did not say every person hearing this podcast should go online and really type in the word prepare to care, AARP. We have a five-step guide that's nationally recognized, that is a five-step process for preparing to be a caregiver, because as Rosalind Carter has said many times, there are four types of people, and those people are those that have been caregivers, those that will be, those that are, and most importantly, those all of us will eventually need a caregiver. And it's starting ahead and asking your loved ones, what do you want? Make them part of the process and start the conversation early. I'm so guilty, as long as many people. We waited until it was a had to be instead of saying, look, this is going to happen. So get your resources and your act together now, because it will save you a lot of pain and trouble, including those legal documents and
I was
those
going to say,
advanced
from a
directives.
workplace or an
Bruce.
employer standpoint, workplaces offering flexible work arrangements. It may not be paid time off. It may just be accommodating different types of schedules and so forth for male caregivers, particularly to care for a family member. Some of these might be thought of as more of accommodations for a female employee, but recognizing that male employees, have families as well. Understanding, we all work with other males. And so, us understanding that they may be in crisis, our coworkers, those that are around us, need understanding and support as well. And then, if we're aware of resources in the community, be free about sharing those resources with others. Don't keep that information, inside. If you know of other males that are caring for a family member, share what resources you know about. And as Mark suggested, AARP and the website's very rich with information about caregiving. And, your communities also have resource centers, senior facilities that often have navigation tools to those other resources.
So I issued a couple of other challenges earlier. My final challenge to men: you won't get my address. You can't come egg my house. This Thanksgiving or next family reunion at the beach or summer trip together, I want all the men to stun their wives and sisters by saying, I listened to this podcast. I need to take leadership responsibility and start this conversation about what this is going to look like when one of our elders in our family system needs care. I talked to, I can go down a laundry list but the latest conversation I had with an adult professional woman running a business and a half full time is the daughter-in-law in a family of 3 sons, all professionals, engineer, I think she said pharmacist, some sort of administrator. I mean, capable, competent men in the professional world. And she's the daughter-in-law being the primary caregiver for her husband's mother by distance. And I'm like, that's just craziness, but it's a story we've all heard so many times. And so, yeah, there's the challenge, guys. Step up at the reunion and at least open the conversation.
I love that. I just love that. You all, thank you so much. There is so much more that we could talk about relative to men as caregivers and just caregiving in general. But each of you brings such heart, such soul, such love for your parents, and also just so much that you know professionally. I do want to make a comment. I guess I want to make 2 comments before we close, and that is, one is, not everyone steps into caregiving because of love. There are some people who come into it out of pure obligation, and we understand that can be the reality for a lot of people, male or female. But I guess what the real takeaway that I'm hearing from you all is, even if you take out of what you have said the evolution of your love and your care for your loved one, there still is so much of what you have said about support each other, recognize that you have somebody, a colleague or a friend, who is in the midst, or yourself, that you are in the midst of a caregiving situation. And the fact is, it can be tough. Mm-hmm. So reach out, either offer support to your friend or your colleague, or ask for it for yourself. Don't be embarrassed to do that. The other thing, of course, I I would be remiss if I didn't say ACAP has lots of resources, lots of videos from our chapters, videos, and lots of podcasts, including one that we did specifically on sibling issues. So I hope our listeners will take a look or listen at some of those. Thank you, Bruce, Bob, Mark. Thank you so much for your time, for your insight, for your heart, for your passion, for what you do professionally, what you do for your parents or did for your parents, and certainly what each of you does for ACAP. I also want to thank our listeners. We hope this conversation will be helpful to you as you or a male loved one continue your caregiving journey, and I hope that you will share it with people that you think might benefit. I certainly want to thank Pace at Home in Hickory, North Carolina. They are the sponsor for all of our Caregiver Community podcasts, and we are indeed grateful to them. This Caregiver Community podcast is part of the Mesh network of online shows and podcasts. We record one new ACAP podcast each month addressing a wide range of topics related to caregiving and advocating for an older adult. You'll find all of our podcasts on any platform where you listen to podcasts, as well as on our website, www.acapcommunity.org. While you're on our site, we certainly hope you will take a few minutes to learn more about ACAP, our educational programs, and our local chapters. And if there are other topics you would like for us to address as a podcast, please do let us know via the website. Stay well, everyone. Thank you again, Bruce, Bob, and Mark. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.